In ancient Egypt, when the Nile floods every summer, the pharaoh's government does something almost no other civilization has ever done. They put hundreds of thousands of farmers, maybe close to 1 million, out of work for 2 months on purpose. Their fields are underwater. They cannot grow food. They cannot tend animals. They cannot, in any meaningful sense, work the land. So instead, the state takes them. The state turns them into builders. The state hands them yokes, ropes, copper tools, and a daily ration of bread and beer. And it sends them across the river to drag 8 million mud bricks up a hillside to construct a temple for a king who is 60 years old, has fathered over 100 children, and intends to be remembered for the next 3,000 years. This isn't slavery. This is policy. The year is 1250 BC. The city is Thebes. The pharaoh is Ramesses II. And right now, you are one of those farmers. This is day 1 of 7 in ancient Egypt. Over the next 7 days, we're going to step into 7 different lives in the most powerful civilization on Earth. The farmer, the tomb builder, the priest, the trader's wife, the soldier, the physician, and on day 7, all of them at once, gathered for the largest religious festival the ancient world has ever produced. But what was it actually like to live one of these lives? Not as a pharaoh, not as a high priest, not as a queen on a throne. As an ordinary person, navigating the strangest, richest, most religiously obsessed society the world has ever produced. Using AI trained on archaeological evidence and historical records, we've reconstructed what 7 days in ancient Egypt actually looked like. Today, day 1, you are a farmer, and your fields are underwater. Let's step back 3,275 years. Dawn. You wake up on a reed mat laid across packed earth. The mat is yours. You wove it yourself last spring, from river reeds you cut at the edge of your fields. The same fields that are now, in this season, 2 meters below the surface of the Nile. The pillow under your head is a shaped wooden block, slightly curved to support your neck. It is not comfortable. You've slept on it your entire life. The room is small, maybe 4 meters by 3. Mud brick walls plastered smooth, painted a faded pale yellow with red trim near the ceiling. There are no windows on the east wall. Egyptians never put windows on the east wall, because the sun is brutal there in the morning. Only a small slit near the ceiling, the width of 2 fingers, for air circulation. Outside, the first roosters are starting up, but you've been awake for 10 minutes already, because that's what happens when you live with 3 children and 2 dogs in a single room. Your name is something the records won't preserve. You're a farmer. You're maybe 30 years old, though you've stopped counting birthdays years ago. The Egyptians don't celebrate them the way we do. You live in a village called Parquet, the pasture, just outside the eastern bank of Thebes, the city the Egyptians call Waset. Across the river, on the west bank, the dead live in their tombs and their mortuary temples. The east is for the living. That's how Egypt is organized. That's how the universe is organized. The east is where the sun rises. The west is where it dies. You step outside. The Nile is 50 meters from your front door. Right now, in the month the Egyptians call Akhet, the river is swollen, brown, full of silt. It's the inundation, the annual flood. It happens every year in roughly the same week, with such reliability that the Egyptian calendar is built entirely around it. Your fields are underwater. They have been underwater for 3 weeks. They will be underwater for 2 more. This is good news. This is, in fact, the best possible news. Without this flood, Egypt is nothing. Without this flood, your children starve. The black silt that the river is dumping across your fields is quite literally the reason this civilization exists. A meter of fresh, mineral-rich soil deposited every single year for free by the river. No fertilizer needed, no crop rotation needed, no fallow years needed. The Nile does the work. The Egyptians have a word for this black soil, Kemet. It's also the word they use for their entire country. Egypt isn't called Egypt by the people who live here. It's called Kemet, the Black Land. The opposite, the red desert that surrounds the river valley on both sides, is called Deshret, the Red Land. Black is life, red is death. This is the basic dualism of every Egyptian's mental map. You walk down to the river to wash. There are women already there, beating laundry against flat stones. There are men loading reed bundles onto a flat-bottomed boat. The bundles will be sold downriver for use in roof construction. There is a boy, maybe 9 years old, watching a hippopotamus surface 50 meters out and trying very hard not to make any sudden movements. Hippos kill more Egyptians every year than crocodiles do. This is not common knowledge in your time. It is universal common knowledge in 1250 BC. A bull hippopotamus can weigh 3,000 kilograms. It can run on land at 30 kilometers an hour. It can bite a man in half. The Egyptian word for hippopotamus is something like Dub, and the goddess Timewarp, who protects pregnant women, is depicted as a hippopotamus standing upright on her hind legs, because the only thing more powerful than the danger of childbirth is the symbol of the most dangerous animal on the river. You wash quickly. You do not turn your back on the water. You head back to the village. Mid-morning. Since your fields are underwater, you can't farm. So instead, like every able-bodied man in your village during the inundation, you've been conscripted by the state for what the Egyptians call bak, corvée labor. Roughly translated, free work for the king. This isn't slavery. You will be released after a set number of days, usually 30, sometimes 60. You will be fed. You will, in some cases, be paid in beer. Your name is recorded on a wooden tablet by a scribe who reports to a foreman, who reports to a senior official who reports, eventually, to the vizier of Egypt himself. There is paperwork. There is always paperwork. The Egyptians invented bureaucracy, and they have not stopped using it for 2,000 years. But you don't have a choice. The pharaoh's projects need bodies, and the inundation conveniently provides a few 100,000 farmers with nothing to do. If you refuse, your village will be fined. If your village can't pay, the men will be beaten. If the situation escalates, soldiers come. It does not escalate. You go. Today, you're carrying mud bricks. A new mortuary temple is going up on the West Bank. Ramesses II is building it for himself. He's been pharaoh for 30 years. He plans to be pharaoh for 30 more. The temple is enormous. The foundations alone will require 8 million bricks. You and 3,000 other men have been hauling them across the river for a month. The bricks are heavy. Each one weighs about 8 kilos, molded from Nile mud mixed with chopped straw, sun-dried for 3 weeks. You carry them in pairs, slung from a wooden yoke across your shoulders. The yoke leaves bruises that never quite fade. Your shoulders, by the time you're 40, will have permanent calluses the size of fists. Egyptian skeletons from this period show this exact pattern of stress fractures along the clavicle. You walk in a long line. There are perhaps 200 men in your section alone, moving in slow procession from the brickyard at the river's edge, up the gentle slope to the temple foundation. The line never stops. It is, in some ways, the river itself, but made of men. There is a rhythm, a song. The Egyptians work to song. The foreman calls the verse, the men respond. The song is about a girl and a fishing net. It is, you realize after the 5th time you've heard it, mildly obscene. Midday. The sun is direct, brutal. You stop. So does everyone else. The Egyptian word for the noon break is something like meshert, the time when the sun is at its peak. You eat in the shade of a half-built wall. Lunch is bread, beer, and onions. Bread is Egypt. Egyptian workers eat between 3 and 4 loaves a day. The bread is dense, dark, gritty. There's actual sand in it from the millstones, and the sand is slowly grinding your teeth down to stumps. By the time you're 40, you'll have lost half of them. Mummies of laborers consistently show this exact pattern of dental wear. Some of the better preserved bodies, when modern dentists examine them, are missing every single molar by age 50. They lived, but they did not chew comfortably. The beer is thick, more like a soup than a drink. Slightly fermented, low alcohol, very nutritious. You're not drinking it to get drunk. You're drinking it because it's safer than the river water and because it has calories. The Egyptians have 100 words for different kinds of beer. The most common kind, the one in your bowl right now, is just called henket, house beer, daily beer. It is sweet, faintly sour, and contains floating bits of bread. You drink it without thinking. The onion is sharp, raw, stings your eyes. You eat it in 3 bites. Egyptian onions, by the way, are famous. The Greek historian Herodotus, 1200 years from now, will write that the inscription on the Great Pyramid of Khufu records the number of onions, garlic, and radishes consumed by the workers who built it. The inscription is probably apocryphal. The onions are real. While you're eating in the shade, Ramesses II is across the river, in his palace at the place the Egyptians call Per Ramesses, the House of Ramesses. He is 60 years old. He has fathered, by his own count, more than 100 children. He has married his own daughter, Bintunath, after her mother died. This was political, not romantic. The Egyptians do not consider it strange. The royal blood must stay royal. There are records of this marriage. It happened. He is, this morning, dictating a letter to a foreign king, possibly the Hittite emperor, possibly a Babylonian, possibly the king of Mitanni. The letter is written by a scribe in elegant cursive hieroglyphs on papyrus. It complains, at length, about gold shipments. The pharaoh believes he is being shorted. He is not subtle about this. We have his actual letters. They are, in tone, exactly like an irritated CEO writing to a vendor who has missed a deadline. You don't know any of this. You're eating an onion. Afternoon. You haul more bricks. The sun moves across the sky. Your shadow shortens, vanishes, lengthens. Your palms blister, the blisters break, the blisters callous. By sundown, your hands are raw, your shoulders are ruined, and your tongue is swollen from thirst. The foreman has been rationing water through the day, because there is not enough to go around. The foreman calls the day. You queue for your daily ration. 1 large jar of beer, 2 loaves of bread, a handful of dates. This will feed your family tonight and for breakfast tomorrow. Evening. You walk home along the riverbank. The sun is setting behind the western cliffs, lighting the surface of the Nile in gold so intense it looks unreal. Boats are coming in from upriver, their square sails catching the last wind of the day. A papyrus skiff slides past, 2 boys fishing from it with nets, their laughter carrying across the water. Your wife meets you at the door. Her name was something the records also won't preserve, though we know what countless women like her did, ate, and prayed for. She has been weaving linen all day on a horizontal loom set up in the courtyard. She has been managing the children. She has been making fresh bread for tomorrow's dough. The dough has to be left to ferment overnight, because the Egyptians do not yet use commercial yeast. Wild yeast in the air does the work. She has been ill, on and off, for weeks. Likely a parasitic infection from the river water. Schistosomiasis, modern doctors call it. About 40% of Egyptian skeletons from this period show evidence of it. The parasite enters through the skin while you're standing in the river. It lays eggs in your bladder, your liver, your intestines. It does not kill you quickly. It just slowly drains you. She does not know this. She knows she is tired. She knows her stomach hurts. She knows she has had 3 children in 8 years, 2 of whom survived, and her body has not really recovered between any of them. You eat together, sitting on the floor. Bread, beer, lentil stew with garlic and cumin. A single piece of dried fish split between 5 of you. The children eat first, then you, then your wife. This is the order. She will eat the smallest portion. She always does. Night. You go up to the roof of your house. Every Egyptian house has a flat roof, used as living space, and you lie down on a fresh mat. The roof is the coolest place to sleep during Akhet. Above you, the sky is so full of stars that they cast soft shadows. You can see the band the Egyptians call the Mer-en-Pet, the heavenly Nile, what we call the Milky Way. They believe it is the river of the sky, on which the sun god Ra sails his solar bark every night, fighting his way through the underworld so that he can be reborn at dawn. The Egyptians have a beautiful theology of the night. They believe that every evening, when the sun sets, Ra dies. He travels through the 12 hours of the underworld, where he is attacked by the serpent Apophis, who tries to swallow him. Each hour, Ra defeats Apophis with the help of other gods. At the 12th hour, just before dawn, Ra is reborn from the body of the goddess Nut, who has swallowed him at sunset and given birth to him again at sunrise. This happens every single night without exception. If the Egyptians' nightly rituals fail, if the priests do not perform the right ceremonies, if the offerings are not correct, Ra might lose. The sun might not rise. The world might end. This is not metaphor. This is, to the Egyptian mind, literal cosmic mechanics. The reason the world keeps existing is that the gods keep doing their jobs, and the priests keep helping them, and ordinary people like you keep paying the taxes that keep the priests fed. You think about none of this. You are tired. Your shoulders hurt. Your wife is asleep beside you, breathing shallow, sometimes coughing in her sleep. The dog is curled at your feet. The stars are extraordinary. Tomorrow you have to do this again. 28 more days of bricks. Then the inundation will recede, and you will go back to your fields, and you will plant emmer wheat and barley in the rich black soil that the river has just deposited, and the cycle will start again. You sleep. That was day 1 of 7 in ancient Egypt. The farmer, 8 million bricks, bread with sand in it, onions. The river that floods and the parasite that lives in the river. A wife with a slow disease and 3 children, 2 of whom survived. Tomorrow, day 2, you will not be a farmer. Tomorrow you will wake up across the river, in a different house, in a different village, with a different job, and a job that almost no other ordinary person in the entire ancient world has access to. You will be a tomb builder in the Valley of the Kings. You will live in one of the most archaeologically rich villages ever excavated, and you will be able to read. If you want day 2, the link is in the description below, or it'll be the next video on this channel as soon as it goes live. Thanks for watching Timewarp Cities. Creating these reconstructions takes enormous amounts of research, piecing together millennia of history into 7 days of one ancient life at a time. If you enjoyed day 1, hit subscribe so you don't miss day 2, and drop a comment. What part of farmer life surprised you most? As always, we'll see you in the past.